Hello, in today's video I'll talk about Furina's energy requirements in detail. I already partially addressed this thing in the last video I made about Furina's builds, but some of the reactions I got regarding the energy requirements specifically made me realize I needed to give this more of a spotlight. The clearest comparison we can make in the game right now for Furina is Yelan, since she has a 70 energy cost for the burst and she also has some similarities in terms of energy generation. In fact, all in all, Furina's energy generation throughout a 20 seconds rotation is similar to the energy generation Yelan has if she uses one skill and takes all the particles generated by that directly. Throughout a 20 seconds long rotation, Furina's elemental skill will generate more particles than a Yelan elemental skill, since the turrets will generate around 7 or 8 particles in total. However, since this particle generation will happen while Furina is off-field, she won't be getting these particles directly and their energy generation is halved. And this just makes Furina's self-energy generation similar to the Yelan scenario I talked about. Let me remind you all that if you enjoy my theory crafting and my content, you can show your support by subscribing and leaving a thumbs up and following me on Twitter. Now, the graph I've used for the Furina build guide video didn't show the full picture, it just did show an instance of energy requirements for a specific team. Depending on the energy generation of non-hydro characters on the team, these energy requirements can fluctuate. Characters like Nahida or Fischl will generate quite a few particles throughout the rotation, so they're characters that if paired with Furina will alleviate her energy requirements by a bit. However, if we're talking teams like Hutao Hyper that run on very tight rotations and don't allow supports to use as many elemental skills as they'd like to, then things start looking pretty tragic. I've compiled a graph with several full team scenarios with full rotations, which should give you a bigger picture of what Furina's energy requirements should be. I've also tried to run a trial with Yelan replacing Furina on a Hyperbloom team. On this team, Yelan has 250% energy recharge and she will be getting 1 Favonius proc per rotation from a Kazuha elemental skill. It's not a real team, it's just for this trial, so don't speak on the composition. Basically, to simulate how Focalors would work in this rotation, I made Yelan use 2 elemental skills in a rotation while not letting her get any of the particles they generated directly. The result is that Yelan ended up regenerating enough energy by the time the rotation hit the 19 or 20 second count. Keep in mind that this is against a boss, so the particles generated by the mobs are nullified, which is a worst case scenario, but it will happen, so it's worth considering. Of course, this is just one scenario though. There are situations where the mobs will generate so many particles that you'll end up getting the burst midway through the rotation, and there are teams that will just generate more particles for Focalors specifically, so it's definitely something you have to look for depending on what you use. However, one important issue that applies to Focalors that doesn't apply to characters like Xingqiu or Yelan is that since her energy generation is delayed, she might have issues in case the rotation ends abruptly. By abruptly I mean if you end an Abyss room while not completing the rotation, which doesn't allow the characters to generate all the particles they could throughout the entire run. The reason this is more of an issue for Focalors rather than Xingqiu or Yelan is that these two characters have elemental skills that generate a lot of particles in a single instance. So odds are they will be able to gain enough energy to use the burst immediately in the next Abyss room regardless. They will have issues in the long run, because practically they've still lost some energy from the previous rotation. But let's just say that this ability of theirs to generate a lot of particles in a single moment will allow her to postpone these issues, and maybe this is better as a whole. Meanwhile, Focalors doesn't have the tools to generate a lot of energy immediately, so she's kind of restricted in that sense. This is specifically bad for her because her burst benefits from being used at the start of the rotation. Again, I'm assuming typical 20 seconds long rotations here, but since her burst will last for 18 seconds and it will gain stacks throughout the entire rotation, the earlier you use it, the more stacks it will gain. For example, let's say you start a rotation and your Focalor's burst is not ready yet, so you make the strategic decision to use it later in the rotation to allow Focalors to regain energy from other characters' elemental skills first. The result is that for that rotation, the burst will have less of an impact, because it will have less time to gain stacks, so the damaging characters on the team will benefit less from it. Also considering it might end up lasting until the next rotation rotation setup time, which is when the damage buffs it provides aren't that useful anymore. So all this complicated stuff is to say that you should probably overinvest into energy recharge for Furina. In general, for off-field high energy requirements turret characters, overinvesting into energy recharge is something you should always do actually. This is kinda like the Xiangling issue. Flowcolors is not quite as bad as Xiangling in terms of energy issues, but she's not much better either, so overinvesting for her energy is something you will not regret probably. But Genshin Scientist, you idiot, why the hell are you not considering using characters like Yelan or Yelan to battery Furina directly? The reason this is not that applicable for Furina is that characters like Yelan or Xingqiu will be close to her in terms of damage contribution for the team. So this means that transferring some energy generation from them to Furina is not that much of a team damage gain. I'm using the term transferring because if you use a character like Xingqiu to battery Furina, he will be needing more energy recharge himself, because he will be getting fewer particles directly. And things just get worse if you assume that you're going to battery Furina with a character like Yelan that will be dealing way more damage than her in a rotation. The term battering is only applicable if the character that is battering the other is way below in terms of damage contribution than the one is battering. For example, a scenario like the Bennett-Xiangling dynamic. Bennett doesn't need many stats for himself because he won't be dealing damage himself, so he can invest on energy recharge as much as he wants and battery Xiangling as much as she needs. Furina just lacks a dynamic like this, and in the first place she won't be dealing the kind of damage Xiangling deals on some of her teams, so it's not like she needs it. Another counter I've seen is that maybe you need to shape Furina's team rotations in a way she will need less energy, for example by extending them. I'm not necessarily saying this can't happen, and of course if you do something like use Furina's burst every 25 seconds or every 30 seconds, her energy requirements surely get lower. But for this to happen, she either needs to find a team that already likes long rotations, or she needs to find a team that likes her burst damage buff so much that shaping the rotations around a sub DPS is worth it. For any other case, it probably won't be worth it, because extending the rotation for the sole purpose of making a sub DPS who's dealing like 20 or 30% of the team damage is just not something that is a benefit for you. A possible example of teams with long rotations that could like Furina is of course the Yelan teams that run on 25 seconds long or 27 seconds long rotations currently. However, part of the reason they run on long rotations is that Yelan needs to use 2 elemental skills per rotation to batter himself. If you consider a partner like Furina, who will be giving him something like 5 or 6 direct particles per rotation, then his energy requirements, even when he uses just 1 elemental skill, become much lower. As a result, it will depend on what he needs. If he needs to extend the rotation, then it will be extended. If he can run on 20 seconds rotation, then they will be fine. But it depends on him because he's the main damage dealer, so the rotation must be shaped around him. As a last part, I wanted to address the Doom posting that is starting about Furina, since I said her energy requirements are high. The reality is that even though her energy requirements can get very high, her damage will still be fine, because she's as a baseline a very strong unit. She could be stronger if her energy requirements were 0, but this is just how she's balanced. In my past video I said her and Yelan have similar levels of damage, and this was already with the high energy requirements assumed, so it's fine. Actually, it got even better lately, because it seems her 2 strongest pets will hit AoE, and this is something Yelan doesn't have, AoE output, which Furina will have, on top of having similar levels of damage in single target. All in all, I think if you consider everything she brings to the table, then the high energy requirements are justified in my opinion. Furina mains, I'm talking to you now. I would also like my favorite characters to be as strong as humanly possible, but this is just not how Genshin works. Luckily, Genshin's game design is based on the fact every character has strengths and weaknesses, which is great to avoid power creep and ultimately favors your favorite characters in the long run, since they won't be power crept. In my opinion, Furina will be a very strong character. Maybe not strong enough to be considered perfect, but still strong enough to be considered very good and probably top tier. And if this is not enough for you, then I just don't know.